You're listening to Within Tolerance, a podcast for machinists by a machinist. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson, and this week I am joined by Andrew Henry of Henry Holsters. Thanks for coming back.
I'm glad to be here, Dylan. Thanks for having me on.
So, if you want to hear Andrew's backstory, head back to episode 26. We dove into that and learned his very interesting route into manufacturing. But I invited him back on because he has had a killer year with some very major business choices and lessons. And let's get into it. What's been going on?
So 2 years ago, we were in a really small shop, a pole barn in Southern Indiana, and I had two employees, was about to hire my third, and we had no single phase power, no three-phase power, no parking lot, no loading dock, no AC. We had a barn. And we purchased a building this past year. We relocated the company. We we added equipment. We're now up to 11 employees. We've launched some new products, and the business has grown to a completely new level of both throughput and excitement, but also complexity, challenges, taxes, organization. It has really stretched me in a lot of uncomfortable ways, but it's also been really exciting. And the first big piece of that was the decision to pursue a building. And I've watched with more than a small amount of envy to see guys like, buying buildings, building buildings. And I was in this little barn and thinking, man, I'm okay here. Like this is working. And then every time I had to stand out in the road in the rain to unload a semi and cut open a pallet and unload stuff onto a dolly and drag it up the gravel driveway into my shop, I'd go, this isn't working. I can't keep doing this. We can't keep doing this. And we kept doing it for a long time. But I started looking around for a building, and I'm not in a very industrial commercial section of Bloomington. Bloomington's a college town. I was just down the west side of Bloomington, and there's just not a lot of industrial commercial space available. And the few spaces that are available are on tiny lots with closely packed neighbors. Like you'd get a building and you'd have a parking lot and you'd have no room to expand. And so I was looking outside Bloomington. We were considering moving to a different city. I ranged around a bit, and there really weren't that many options that interested me without going, hours away, relocating everything, uprooting the whole family. And I eventually found a realtor, and she got a listing for a machine shop that had gotten built in the early 90s, and it was 10 minutes up the road from my existing shop. And it had three-phase power. It had a loading dock. It had 2 acres of property. It had AC, and it was, a family-owned shop, and they wanted to sell. So I went and saw it, and it was so far beyond at the time what we could reasonably consider swinging. Our pole barn was 1,200 square feet. This shop was 11,000 square feet, and it had just so much more space than we needed, and it was going to be a project to clean it up. It needed new lights. It needed a new air system. It needed a bunch of stuff painted. The bathrooms needed redone. The floors needed scrubbed because it was actually a stamping shop. They had a couple of big federal F8 and F10, 100 and 125 ton vertical stamping presses in that shop, which is why they had poured a really thick slab. But I loved the building. It was pretty dirty and dingy and kind of depressing because the business had been on its way to shutting down for almost 10 years. And so they hadn't really done much maintenance, much cleaning, any upkeep. It was kind of bleak, but the bones were good. The structure was solid and I loved it, but I couldn't do it. So I just let it go. And the listing went away and I resigned myself to having to shop around in Bloomington and find something that was smaller, more expensive, didn't have land. I was bummed about it. And then a year or so later, the listing had been long gone. I was driving by there again and I thought, I wonder what happened to that place. So I just cold called and I left a message on their answering machine. Like it was like a legit answering machine. You could practically hear the tape running in the background.
Yeah, that's how you know that they're old school.
and I said, I introduced myself, gave my name, explained that I'd been in and seen the building the previous year and just wondered what had happened to it if it was still for sale. And the son, so it was family owned, father and son, the son who's about my age called me back and said, actually, it is still for sale. We stopped working with that realtor, but we never found a buyer. And if you want to come see it again, I'd like to show it to you. And I had a good hard think about that because I knew if I went and saw it again, I'd have a much harder time talking myself out of it because we'd grown in that year. We had more throughput. We needed more people. We were busting at the seams in our current shop. So I went and looked at it, and it took me probably 2 or 3 months of weighing pros and cons and wargaming out in my head how we'd work it out, how we would finance it, what the move would look like, what things we'd have to put in place in order to make that move and not die. Because, the risks you take in uprooting your whole company and unplugging all the machines is sometimes things don't go smoothly. And I made up my mind to go for it. And right around that time, COVID started happening. And so everything just got sort of slowed down. And I was working with the SBA trying to get a mortgage. And then the SBA was then completely busy with payroll protection, small business, loan and payroll support, all the stuff that came as federal measures for the pandemic. And it dragged on for months. I was trying to get the SBA to give me a mortgage for this building. And it dragged on and it dragged on and it dragged on. And while it was dragging on, I bought an R650 and I had no place to put it. I got a call from my sales rep at Yamazin who'd sold me my previous 2 Speedios. And he's like, hey, you and I have talked about this machine before. I know you want one. I know we can't fit it in your current shop, probably. But if you manage to throw some things out or, Tetris some things into the corner, I've got an R650 and I really want to get it out of here and I'll give you a screaming deal on it. And I went, okay, tell me, how screaming a deal? And he told me, and it was a screaming deal. And so I'm in the process of trying to get this building. And I'm like, okay, should I really chunk away an entire machine's worth of money also? Should I get another loan right now? Am I going to do this? And we did it. We bought the machine in July with the provision that Yamazin would hold it for us as late as mid-December. But I had to have it on my floor in operation by the end of the year. And so then there was a little more pressure, to make sure we got the building purchase done, closed, everything done, moved in, power cleaned up, air system in, because I needed to land this machine and get it operational. And the SBA was dragging their feet. I don't think they were being irresponsible. I think they were just swamped. And then I kept reminding the SBA lender I was working with, I'm like, hey man, we have a hard deadline of December 10th to 12th to close on this. We've got a hard deadline. And then 2 weeks before we were supposed to close, he's like, oh, by the way, there's a bunch of environmental stuff we have to do. It's going to take at least 4 to 6 weeks.
Oh.
And I went, I specifically asked about that in August, and you told me we wouldn't need it. And we did all the environmental questionnaire stuff you asked for at that time. And now you come back to me and say, we need an environmental phase 1. You need to hire an outside service to come in and do soil samples and all this stuff. And it's going to take a month to get that person, to get on the schedule to have that person come and do the work to then write the report that the SBA would have to review before they could approve the loan. So I fired the SBA lender. I said, I'm done with this. We're not doing this. And I had already talked to the local bank that I'd used to finance my previous machine and finance the R650. And the terms of a mortgage not through the SBA aren't quite as nice, but it wasn't bad. And, that banker has known me for years. She's come out and seen my shop a number of times. She knows what we do. And so she said, hey, if this SBA thing doesn't work out, call me. We can get you a mortgage for that building. So I called her. I'm like, hey, guess what? Amy, I'm done with the SBA. They just sprang this thing on me that they told me they wouldn't spring on me. Even though I carefully asked about it, they sprang it on me. So I'm done with that. Can we get a mortgage done? And she had already gotten a bunch of the stuff figured out ahead of time, and we were able to get the mortgage approved and closed on time, and I got the keys on December 10th. And that whole month was just a blur because I was scheduling my Yamazin tech to be there on December 21st. I had to get the machine rigged, get it delivered, get it placed, run power and air to it. We had to get delivery of a Kaiser compressor at the new building as well, because the compressor they had in there was a big old horizontal, I think Ingersoll probably, but it had been installed. They had bracketed it to the floor when they built the building, and it had never been cleaned or oiled or anything since. And they had cast iron pipe run up above the ceiling in the uninsulated crawl space throughout the whole building for their air system. And it
Oh,
was
jeez.
the whole air system was completely trashed. So we had to get a Kaiser, get it delivered, get it powered, get the brother delivered, get it powered, and then get the Amazon tech in like a couple days before Christmas to get everything signed off on so that we could put the machine in service and have it operational in the new space and write it off. And we did. We got it. Like, I was running parts on it on like December 23rd, but it was nip and tuck the whole way. Like, there was a miscommunication with the riggers, and they showed up with a forklift. They were supposed to bring steel plates because the parking lot's gravel, and they didn't. And like the loading dock is a roll down, not an on grade, not a raised loading dock. So you have to back a semi down a concrete ramp, and so you unload at ground level.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was great, except the rigging guys brought a low run trailer, so they couldn't use the loading dock, and they couldn't drive their fork truck in the parking lot. And we ended up just sort of like angling the trailer up to the pad next to the loading dock and sort of forking it off with the tips of the forks.
Oh.
And I actually just walked away. Like, I couldn't stand there and watch it. It made me feel so stressed. And it had been cold and rainy, and like everything was kind of icy and slick. And they're out on this pad lifting this machine off, and it had been a showroom machine, so it's not in a crate. It's just wrapped in plastic. And I'm just watching this going, oh, please don't drop this. And then I just had to walk around the other side of the building and like catch my breath and send an email and, drink some water, do something different. I could not stand there. I just came back when they had it into the bay. Whew. Makes me stressed out just thinking about it. But we got it in, got it under power, got it signed off on, got it operational, made parts on it. And then 2020 closed with a bang. And then we had a huge tax bill due because we'd had an absolutely crazy fourth quarter in 2020. I think we did as much revenue in quarter four as we'd done in the previous 3 quarters.
Jeez.
So we're going like just bananas the whole end of the year. And I got creamed on quarter four taxes. And I was so unprepared emotionally. That was actually one of the main things was on my little list of notes for this podcast, was reminding other entrepreneurs that as you grow, the numbers get bigger. Like, the machines you can afford get bigger. You can buy a building, your payroll grows, you add more people, like everything gets bigger, everything costs more. And I was not prepared emotionally for how I would feel as the tax checks that I had to write got bigger. And I found that I knew they were going to get bigger. I didn't really know how much they were going to get bigger. And I did not anticipate how bad it would make me feel. And I'm still not over that. I'm still calibrating what that's like to be at a new level of revenue, to have a new level of responsibility. I've got more employees, more people are relying on the company for their livelihood. The risks of severely messing it up are bigger. And every quarter for a couple days, around April 15th, June 15th, September 15th, I have kind of a black day or two, because it's demoralizing, because I still am I don't have any distance from what it was like to be, buying my first machine in 2015 and teaching myself how to use it with YouTube and pretty much nothing else. And the idea that what I pay now in a quarterly tax bill is like more than my annual salary was when I was just starting off. It's hard to keep those things in perspective. And it's been painful. I have a good CPA, but the CPA's job is not to prepare you emotionally. The CPA's job is to make sure that the IRS doesn't audit you.
Right.
And those are two completely different things. Like, my CPA is a really nice guy, but he's very businesslike. And I wish somebody had said, hey, if this is how you're doing, just a heads up, this is going to happen and it's really going to feel bad.
Right. This is going
And
to hurt, just so you
th-
know.
this is really going to hurt. And it's not just going to hurt the first time it happens. It's going to hurt every quarter that it happens. And it's just going to hurt.
Yeah.
And that is a normal part of the business growing. And 2020 was, like the second year we showed what I would consider to be significant profits. Like there was real money involved. Like I used to be a school teacher and I built this company on the side while I was a teacher. And we basically just came out even every year. I bought some more tools. I learned some more things. And we basically came out scratch even at the end of the year. And I was happy. And I was paying myself a little bit of money out of the company to supplement my teacher salary because a teacher salary needed supplementing. But like
That's the
I
truth.
wasn't paying myself like anything like an appropriate full-time wage for the work I was doing. And so I'm having to recalibrate constantly that this is what we're doing now. This is what's involved now. This is what a monthly P&L looks like now.
You
And
mentioned that the company's grown quite a bit too. How big are you guys?
we got 11 employees. I started with one full-timer, then hired a second full-timer, then hired a third full-timer. Now I've got 7 full-timers and 4 part-timers.
That's amazing.
And yeah, so we've added a few new capabilities this year since we moved into the building. Since we had all this space now, there were some projects that we had been working on, but hadn't had really a timeline to execute because we didn't have any room for more equipment in the old shop. We added 2 Boss 36555 150 watt CO2 lasers. We added some Juki automated bar tacking machine. So we have a little sewing cell and a Sheffield automated hot roll cutter for cutting different kinds of roll webbing, because we have some laser cut and sewn nylon products that are essentially belt components for some of our holster OEM clients. And we really wanted to be able to bring those capabilities in-house so that we could design more complete systems for them and not have to. If one thing 2020 made coordinating stuff with other shops in other states in order to match up production numbers to deliver complete assemblies to a third party, that made it a lot harder. 2020 was just a zoo for that kind of thing. And especially in the fabric world, textiles and sewn goods, that's a completely different wild west even than material supply in machine shops. And there were times when different kinds of bar stock and different kinds of plate were harder to get or easier to get. But the textile industry is global in a way that a lot of the other stuff isn't necessarily. Like if I need to buy pretty standard 6061 bar stock, there's already a lot of that in the US. Like I can get it from somewhere. Some of this other stuff, a lot of the textiles are coming from overseas, and if they don't have them, and if the supply production dips, you can't get any later. So there were actually a few things where I think we got the last spool of that thing that distributor had in North America. And it's like, okay, I'll take that, please. Yes, I want that one. I'll take the whole roll. Thank you. So adding laser, adding sewing, spreading out the shop, getting the R650 in, getting it programmed, learning how to work with the twin table system and create a new workflow for that, hiring new employees, training them in. We really outran my ability to organize and manage. And that was painful because nobody wants to set employees up for failure. No owner wants to have employees struggling because he didn't give them the information they need to do their job well. That's bad for everybody. Nobody enjoys it. And we started burning through so many more pieces of hardware, so many more belt clips, so many more screws, so many more of every single thing that we used, that I would literally order some, receive them in, blink, take a sip of coffee, and then they were gone again. And one of my employees is like, do we have more of these? I'm like, yeah, we just received 5,000 of those. Some standard screw that we use in everything.
Right.
I'm like, we just received 5,000 of those. And he's like, yeah, but I checked the bin and this bag of 500 is the last thing in it. And I went, you're kidding me. Like, have we shipped that much? And then we go and look at the shipping records for the past 2 weeks. And it's like, oh, yeah, well, if every assembly consumes 4 of those, yeah, wow, okay, I'll get some more ordered today. And so more than we ever had in the previous 6 years, we ended up with more disruptions in our flow because I fell behind and didn't get things, even things that we could have easily had in time, things that weren't on long back order, just things that I didn't get ordered in time to keep pace with our increasing velocity and consumption.
Right. So actually, that gets into one of our questions and one of the notes. So Austere Manufacturing asked, he'd love to hear the nuts and bolts of implementing lean, specifically how you approach setting inventory minimums and batch sizes, and you putting the notes failing at lean. So I guess, how did you start, or before this massive growth, or as you were starting to grow, how did you approach setting inventory minimums? And then what are you changing now to kind of accommodate this growth?
So we used laminated Kanban cards for everything. We had Kanban cards in every bin. They had the part number, the vendor info, and the minimums. And since we moved, we were in both shops. We got the new building in December and moved the R650 and a few other things to it. And so we ran some production there. But the guys who sold the building to us leased it back from us for 3 months so that they could liquidate all their equipment. So I was going over to the new shop and working on the R650 some in the evenings, and we were still running production in the old shop, and we fully moved into the new building in mid-June. And at that point, I basically threw out all the Kanban cards because we were to a point where every single Kanban card in the building needed to be replaced. Every minimum we had for everything from rolls of bubble wrap to boxes to screws to belt clips to thermal labels, literally every single thing that we ordered, all of our minimums were now out of date. And I knew it had been on my radar for a year or two that at a certain point, I was going to want to move to an ERP. I knew I wanted to do it. I had been looking at ERPs. I'd looked at ProShop. I did a little bit of time in another shop helping them, and they were using Fishbowl, so I got to play around with that a little bit. And I paid careful attention to John Saunders building Lex, and then a little bit of looking at things like Job Boss, just poking around and seeing how do these things look? How do they feel? What are the ins and outs? And I talked to a few other larger shop owners about the ERPs they used, what they liked, what they didn't, how long implementation took. Did they ever really feel like they'd gotten fully implemented, or were there still like, a few untied shoelaces dragging around that you tripped over every once in a while? And actually, the episode where you had Sonny from Fulcrum on was interesting to me because I'd never heard of Fulcrum before that. And I ended up checking them out, and they are who we have gone with. We are in the midst of ERP implementation right now, in the thick of it. But we did a lot with Kanban cards, and Kanban cards were great. I made fantastic use of a little desktop laminator, and I used the mini Kanban cards that Jay Pearson shared. And there was a PDF file that went around, and that was fantastic. And it helped my employees visualize our inventory, keep track of what was what, understand exactly what everything was called. And we did a very sort of small bins in the assembly area, larger bins for breadcrumb overstock stuff in a particular area in the shop. So if your little bin ran low, you always knew where to go to get more of it. And we Kanbaned both the small bin and the big bin. And we did things like we'd have a little emergency bag of 500 pieces that was stapled shut that was in the big bin. And if you got to that and you opened it, you had to go tell me and I would order more. But it used to be that a 500 piece bag would be like, oh, we opened the 500 bag. We've got 3 weeks. It'll be fine. I can get to it on Friday. And now it's like, oh, we opened the 500 piece bag. Well, that's going to be gone in 48 hours. I need to rush this. And so rather than going back and simply taking all the Kanban cards I'd already done, and, I was printing those off on PDFs, handwriting all the information, cutting them out, and then laminating them, I wasn't excited about going back and re-handwriting all new info on every Kanban card and relaminating all of them, knowing that hopefully within 6 months, we were going to be stepping off into an ERP and using more system automation to track that stuff. We didn't do anything like inventory audits. I never went around the shop and said, like, today we're counting everything up and making sure we've got what we think we have. Everything was just done visually. Everything was in clear Sterilite bins, so I could walk past those hardware racks and at a glance see everything.
How are you setting minimums at that point? Was it just a feeling or a guess, or did you have historical data from whatever shipping software you use?
We would look back at some historical data. I would go review POs, but more often than not, it was like hey, how many are we ordering at a time? And I would look at how frequently I had to reorder that thing. Like, hey, if we're ordering these screws 1,000 pieces at a time and I'm having to order them every 3 weeks, we should bump that up. We should just hold more on hand, and we should make if we're going to keep consuming more, then we should make the minimum on hand higher as well, so that we both buy a larger batch and we trigger that reorder sooner in case anything weird happens. And a few times weird things have happened. Like just today, I got a shipment in of some stuff that I'd ordered, and normally we had a 3 to 4 week lead time. And the last time I ordered them, we broke open the last box of 1,000 pieces. I'm like, okay, let's order those, because we order that part 10,000 pieces at a time. I called my vendor up. I said, this is the part number. I need to order 10,000. And they said, it's going to be 10 to 12 weeks.
Jeez.
And I went, excuse me? Because everything about our minimums up to that point had been based on, for several years now, a pretty reliable 3 to 4 week lead time. And the stuff's only coming from Ohio. There's no shipping time. It's like next day. And so finding out that all of a sudden we were looking at least 10 weeks, and it was every bit of 10 and a half weeks to get it. It came today. That absolutely jacked up my entire production, because that's the thing we use. It's like ketchup. We put it on everything. That's a critical part for us. And so I had to make a bunch of phone calls and find alternate vendors who had a comparable part already in inventory, because we had a particular version of this. It's just a rubberized strap that we use to make our flexible belt loops. We had it cut for us with tooling dies that we own at the factory that makes the webbing. But their production time was then 10 weeks out. So I had to find another company that had a similar product and buy thousands of them to tide us over till our batch arrived. And so we had to say, okay, we're going to be now we have to track lots, because the version we bought from this other company and the version we normally get from our vendor aren't exactly the same. They're interchangeable in terms of function, but they're not identical. Like if you got a holster that had one of each on it, they'd look mismatched. And so we had to then keep track of how many of each thing we had. Now, today that the original order came in, I need to make sure that we sequester all the interim batch, use them all up so they're gone, and only then change back over to our part. And that kind of thing is fine if it happens once or twice a year. It feels like things like that are happening every 2 or 3 weeks, sometimes every week, just because everything's going way, way, way faster. The whole car shakes a whole lot more at 90 miles an hour on the highway. And you're just like, I didn't hear that sound before. Is that shimmy usually there? Why is my window rattling?
You needed an ERP for sure.
I know you can definitely run a larger company that does more production and more revenue than what I do without an ERP. There's no bright line beyond which you absolutely have to have an ERP. But the way that my company is currently structured and the way that it's staffed, I am still the only programmer in the company. And so there are certain other things that, as the company grows, that workload automatically increases, and it crowds out my ability to manage the logistics side of the company.
And I'd argue you can't run a lean business your size or bigger without an ERP or a massive staff to simulate an ERP.
Yeah. We've jokingly, one of my employees always wants to call, he said, as soon as we get that ERP, I'm naming it Wyatt. I'm like, dude, we're not naming it Wyatt Earp. Come on. But he has a real zest for naming things. We have a little area at the back of the shop that he wants to convert into sort of an employee lounge, and he wants to call it the Coco Bongo Club. And I'm like, man, you have all these great ideas. We're going to wait on that. And he built me a little photography booth so we could do product photography. So it's got white sides and backs. So we can splash light off it and get nice fill without hard shadows. I'm like, okay, this is our photo booth. And he goes, we should name it John Wilkes. I'm like, we're not naming it the John Wilkes booth. And then everybody else heard it and they're like, oh no, we're naming it the John Wilkes booth. So now I do my product photos in the John Wilkes booth.
That's fantastic. That's a good one, actually. I mean,
it's all funny, but it's just like, really? But actually, I found I think that the pandemic, in a lot of ways, challenged what most companies think of when they think of a lean company. And the idea that lean means absolutely minimal inventory of raw materials, just in time delivery. Like if I need plate stock tomorrow morning, I'm going to order it and have it delivered today. Like as stuff started to unravel, we had to up our quantities on everything, not just because consumption increased, but because we could already tell. It's like playing crack the whip. If you're the dude at the end, as that whip speeds up and the line of kids snaps you faster and faster, you're no longer running. You're like bounding and touching the ground every 10 feet until one time you can't keep up and then you face plant.
Right.
And we were already getting tremors of that. Like we use a bunch of different colors of plastic, and occasionally certain colors would be completely unavailable. Only one company would have that particular color that was spec'd for a specific product we make for a specific client. And we'd go to order some and they didn't have any. The distributor didn't have any. They didn't know when they'd get any more from the factory. They just didn't have any. And I'm like, okay, so were we talking weeks? Are we talking months? And they're like, we have no idea. They're not telling us anything. I don't know if the issue is pigments. I don't know if the issue is plastics to make the base to do the extrusion on the sheets. We don't know what the issue is. We don't know if they're short-staffed because half their employees have COVID and they've got half their extrusion lines down. We don't know what the issue is. They just told us no ETA on this color. I'm like, okay. Well, let me call the client back and say, no ETA on your PO. Sorry.
Well, you kind of saw it immediately too, because you have your hand sanitizer holster that you used to include, or you were including a bottle with, and then it just dried up like immediately. Like I remember that, like, first month of lockdown, you were like, well, I'm out. This is it. Like,
yeah.
Sorry.
Well, the funny thing was we continued selling the carriers by themselves without the Purell all through the pandemic. And there were actually a few weeks in 2020 where that was our top product in terms of units moved. It was like, man, we're selling a lot of these every day. So we added a bunch of colors. We now have it in a whole bunch of fancy neon colors, and we added a bunch of different color cords so you can roll your own crazy combination. But yeah, just recently, I was able to start getting in, again, bulk cases of the little 1 ounce travel Purell bottles. But yeah, they were just gone. They vanished so fast. They were nowhere. And yeah, that product started years ago as a joke that I only took as a giveaway to trade shows. And I would just I was going to a trade show. I'd buy like 31 ounce bottles of Purell. I'd make up 30 of those carriers. I'd take them to the trade show in my backpack. And if you knew me and knew that I had them, you could ask me for one and I'd let you pick a color. Like we had like black and gray. But we had enough people asking about it that we just said, okay, we'll make it a standard item. And we did. And we still sell them, which is awesome. But yeah, I think everybody felt that the things that you used to be able to take for granted and lean around were no longer necessarily going to be reliable. And that your lean approach had to lean a little bit more toward robustness and a little bit less toward maximum streamlining. Because, if you need parts and you can't get them and you don't have them, that's no piece flow. And it's bad. It's a form of waste.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, like if you were in the middle of a pandemic, still trying to run a just-in-time manufacturing plant, you were playing like fortune teller. You're like, what is going to run out? I need to buy that ahead of time, but just in time. Like it's almost impossible.
Yeah. And it was surprisingly stressful. Thankfully, I mean, Indiana and the area we were was not nearly as hard hit as many other places. And because of some of the work we do, we were considered an essential business. We remained open. We did do some rearranging because, the height of COVID in our area was while we were still in the old shop, which was small, but we kept all the doors and windows open. We respaced some things out so people could be spread out more. And we did all the things we could reasonably do in order to make it like, no one needs you to wear a paper mask when you've got a full-size respirator on. So like some of our employees who worked like in finishing and buffing and were, blending plastic edges all the time, they just had their, giant 3M face masks on and they were fine, completely unaffected by the pandemic at work.
Right.
But an ERP as a thing that I knew I wanted to head toward was clearly on the horizon. And then once it came time to actually start making decisions about what we wanted, what we were willing to spend, and then starting to try to envision what the likely pitfalls that our particular company would encounter in ERP land, that all got very much more serious and very granular. And pretty much any ERP will give you time. They will get on a Zoom call with you. They will walk you through a bunch of questions. ProShop has a fantastic library with lots of videos showing a lot of things about how their shop works, how their clients have implemented it in their shops. And it was tremendously informative, but we wanted to do entirely mobile, so everybody on iPads. We wanted basically the ERP workstations, the iPads, to travel with an employee and not be tied to a workstation. And a lot of ERPs are kind of based around having a monitor, a full-size keyboard, and a mouse. And they give you so much stuff on the screen to deal with that if you try to do it in a mobile environment, you end up horizontal scrolling all the time. And horizontal scrolling is just death. It's so frustrating to have there be things that are there, but they're off your screen. And you've got to like drag left and then drag right and then drag back left and be like, is that it? And then drag right and go, nope, that's it. Check the box. I'm not down for it. And so when we looked at Fulcrum in particular, they're a much younger company. They've only been around a couple of years. They're obviously web and mobile centric. And that was really attractive because everything about the look and the feel and the way they laid things out and the way they grouped visual information on the screen made sense in a mobile environment. It looked like an ERP app. It is an ERP app. And so as we looked into that more and more, it seemed like that was going to be the one that had the least amount of user interface friction for what we wanted to do. Then the question was, is it going to actually work for how our workflow works? And so we had a bunch of Zoom calls, first with a sales guy and then with some of the implementation techs after my questions got a little too specific and technical for the sales guy. He was very nice, but I really wanted to say, okay, here's a sample bomb. Here's 15 part numbers. I want to actually have you put this together, show me a quick workflow. I want to see the screens it's going to go through and see how it actually looks. And that required somebody with a little more back-end experience running the thing in order for us to see what we wanted to see. So we decided to go with it and we signed on with Fulcrum. And we're now about halfway through implementation. We're 4 weeks in. And the goal is to basically have everything pretty much usable in about 8 weeks. And I'd say we're making good progress. It was an enormous amount of inputting of data. A lot of things in our shop we'd never even really had part numbers for. It's like, oh yeah, it's that thing in that bin. Yeah, the red one. That. Yeah. And now it's like, okay, what do we want to call this? How can we give it a unique identifier? What do we want to have it say? And it's just been a lot of time in spreadsheets in the past 2 or 3 weeks. But I'm really excited about it. It hasn't left a sour taste in my mouth. It is obviously a direction that I think we want to go. So I've been talking at you for a long time. What's on your mind, Dylan?
Well, actually, ERP has been something that I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think we're very near needing something like that. More for scheduling than I think anything, because trying to keep everything in my head or even just in a simple Google Sheets doc is not easy.
Yeah. Are you still using Airtable and stuff to track work that's upcoming?
I never really got into what I would consider even half-assed implementation of that. The integration kept breaking with my bookkeeping software, where I kept having to re-log into it. And it just became, for the last year or so, we've been so busy, and especially with me doing double duty and Brad doing double duty, that like there hasn't been any time to just sit down and take care of something like that. It's like I need to spend every moment programming or quoting or making parts or something like, or, something along those lines. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping in 3 weeks here when I'm full time that I can get back into the Airtable, because I'm using a Google Sheet right now because it's easy to just say this customer, here's a description of the part or whatever, and here's the due date, and then I can just add it to the list. But
Yep.
there's no way to filter out by jobs that are done. There's no way to track any data. So Airtable is probably what we'll end up doing for at least now.
Yeah. we were still running pretty much everything on the shop in with paper travelers. We used color-coded travelers, which I've shown in some of my YouTube videos before, to indicate routing. So, color-coded cards would tell you where this bin of parts was routed to next. And then we would just have laminated little, like basically little mini whiteboards. And we had whiteboard markers everywhere. And you could just grab a laminated tag, write any other relevant information on there, drop it on top of the bin. And then at the end of the day, when we'd collect the empty bins, we'd pull out all those, wipe them, hang them up to dry, and then use them the next day. And it worked. But what it didn't give me was any access to historical data that I could actually run reports on. It's like you feel like the ground has shifted hugely under your feet and you want to quantify it, but you can't because everything is just ink on a piece of paper in a folder in your filing cabinet somewhere. And it's like, well, I feel like the change has been about this. And you're just making it up. Like
Right.
you've got a blindfold on, you think you're facing toward the right wall, there's a dartboard there somewhere, and you're just going to send it.
Yeah.
And
Well, I mean, it's not like a data set until you put it all together. Like individual data points mean nothing on their own. It's when you aggregate them that you actually get meaningful data that you can act on.
yeah. And on the retail side, like the stuff we make under the Henry Holsters brand and we sell on our website, I have historical data on that because all those orders come in through WooCommerce and get routed through ShipStation. So I can go back and look, over the past 24 months, this individual SKU, how many did we sell? When did we sell them? How has the rate trended up or down on this particular item? And I found that incredibly useful in saying, hey, you know what? These 2 or 3 SKUs, it's time for them to go away. When you do a historical report on those over the past 24 months, those contribute so little to the overall bottom line that it's not even worth pushing them through the next round of revisions when we give the product a facelift next year. We're just going to drop them. And as long as we're going to drop them in a couple of months, let's just drop them now. Let's put the last 10 pieces that are in inventory on sale, get them out of here, and just get rid of that product forever. And realizing that on the wholesale side, I had none of that information at my fingertips. Like I know which customers we do the most work for, and I know what work we do for them. But in actually looking at the various kinds of jobs that I've taken on over the past 5 years and saying, where are we actually delivering the most value? And it's a business. Where are we the most profitable? Which of these
Right.
jobs are really doing the lion's share of the work of building this company, building our cash reserves, helping us pay for equipment, allowing me to give the employees raises? Which of these jobs are really contributing and which of them are just treading water? Because if you come to a point where you have more of the heavy duty jobs that are really driving, bottom line revenue, top line revenue, profit, it doesn't make any sense to continue doing jobs that you're just treading water in. It doesn't make any sense. And there were a number of customers, wholesale customers that we'd had for a few years that I parted ways with in 2020. And it wasn't acrimonious. I wasn't firing people because I was a jerk or they were a jerk. It was just hey, we've run this part for you for the past 3 years. We did one minor price increase on it in 2018. We're really due for another one. And also we need to put some larger minimums on this if we're actually going to continue to make it for you so that it's not kind of tripping us up when it appears on the production schedule. Like, I don't want to set this job up and run 30 pieces for you. I want to set this job up and run 200 pieces for you. And in some cases, what we needed to make it continue to make sense for us to make it didn't make sense for them. And so I helped them find somebody else who could do it for them. Or I, said, okay, well, here are some suggestions I have about how you could redesign the part to find somebody else to make it for you. But this next batch is going to be the last one. And after that, I'm not going to accept any POs for this part. And that's kind of a growing up moment. Like as a business owner, letting a client go, firing an employee, paying a big tax bill, dealing with a workman's comp claim. There are all kinds of things that like you deal with for the first time. And I've not dealt with a workman's comp claim yet. Thankfully, we have a pretty responsible, level-headed set of employees and we keep a clean, safe shop. But a lot of those things, you haven't done them till you've done them. And then it's like, okay, wow, that was a thing. And oftentimes, honestly, if you have a particular job that you needed it 4 years ago, it helped you tread water when your only goal was not drowning. And now it hasn't grown. The company you're doing that for hasn't grown, and they still want to order 20 pieces at a time. It's like, you know what? What's going to happen if I continue to offer them the option to order that from me is that they're just going to gradually get squeezed out, and I'm not going to be honest with them about it. They're going to order that, and I'm not going to be able to deliver it promptly because I'm going to be in the middle of some other thing that I can't stop just to run their 20 pieces. It would be better for me and better for them if I'm just very transparent about where we're headed and have it not be personal. Like, I don't want your parts anymore. I don't like you. But I mean, that can be, as a business owner, it is completely legitimate to let a customer go because you don't like them and you no longer want to deal with their shenanigans. That is
totally
completely wonderful. If you get a chance to step away from a thing that has turned into a real bummer because the customer is just a pill. I had one customer who every single time they reordered, they'd ordered from me for years. Literally every single time they ordered, they asked for a lower price. They asked for another new price break. And they progressively wanted to run smaller and smaller batches. They wanted lower volume with more variety of colors. And they always asked, can we get a little bit more off the price, like 5 points off? And I'm like, guys, we used to run 400 of these at a time for you in black, and that was a good afternoon's worth of machining. Now you want to order 60 mixed across 5 different colors, and you want to pay less for them.
Right.
I'm
those
sorry.
two Venn diagrams don't overlap.
There's no touchy here.
Yeah. You could choose one or the other, but not together. Sorry.
You can have it fast, cheap, or from me. Choose two.
You mentioned workflow. Let's kind of jump into one of the other questions we had from Obsidian Tools, which was, what do you think about one-piece flow and holster production? And I guess that kind of gets into, how do you handle these, various product SKUs that you have now?
I really like one-piece flow, but I like one-piece flow, but we don't really focus on continuous one-piece flow. I'm not trying to have a single unit go all the way from raw material to finished holster with the absolute least amount of touches and time. I'm not trying to make a straight shot for a single thing, because we almost always have 5 or 6 different SKUs in production at any given moment. We'll have one thing running on this machine and one thing running on that machine. And certain stations like buffing and assembly, everything kind of hubs through there. Individual SKUs don't have their own assembly line. They'll get allocated to a specific or scheduled on a specific CNC machine, get run there, and then they have to queue up at the buffing station to get the edges deburred, and then they go to assembly. And when I think about one-piece flow, what I'm trying to reduce is batch work within steps. I want to have it set up so that parts are always moving through each stage, and we're not building up an enormous pile of work in process at any given point. We always have some work in process. We never time it. So like at the end of the day, all the shelves are empty, absolutely everything's shipped, nothing is in process, because the CNC machine's running till the end of the day. And those parts are not getting deburred. The parts that come off the machine at 4:55 in the afternoon are not getting deburred right then. They're going in a bin, and they're going over to the deburring area, the buffing station, and they're going to be part of that little mini batch that gets buffed first thing in the morning. So we have some amount of work in process in the shop, but I am trying to keep each station flowing so that it's not stacking up places. Like specifically at the CNC machines, we'll have one operator who is heating up the plastic, forming the plastic, cooling the plastic, loading it into the CNC. CNC is drilling it, trimming it, and then that operator is also inspecting the part, all in one little U-shaped cell that's set up right in front of the machine, so that if there's any defects in the forming process, those get caught right then. And we don't have a person finding those problems at assembly.
Right. That makes sense.
And so we've definitely reduced our defect rate significantly. And we've also been able to much more accurately run to the numbers on an order. We had one key piece of equipment that we used all the time in the old shop that when we made the move to the new shop, I mothballed it. And it was a decently sized automated vacuum former. It had twin operator stations, top and bottom infrared ovens, had pneumatic everything, PLC controlled. So you'd write a program for time and temperature and soak time in the ovens. And then it had a mobile bed that would raise the molds up into the forming area, turn on the vacuum pump, turn on the cooling fans. It was an automated vacuum former. Super awesome. But it had a 24 by 24 forming area. So you'd have to make at least 4 or 6 holsters per shot in and out of the oven, which meant you almost always, no matter what the order quantity was, it seemed, you always ran a few units over just by default based on the multiple you were working in. And if you defected any out, if you had a bad pull on that machine, you'd get 4 bad shells or 6 bad shells. So you weren't defecting things out one at a time. If there was a problem, it was a problem with that sheet, and every part in the sheet was affected. And so if we needed to make 200 or 300 of something, we'd have to overrun by 12, 16, 20 parts just to make sure that if we caught any defects in the sheets later when they got trimmed and we had to defect out an entire sheet's worth of 6 pieces, that we didn't suddenly end up below our order number and have to go back and fire up the former again just to make 6 or 12 more pieces. And so that had just a demoralizing amount of constant nagging overproduction that always happened off that machine, because the only alternative was run to the numbers, cross your fingers, and then inevitably we defect 1 or 2 out, because vacuum forming on a machine like that is a very fussy process. It's subject to air movement in the shop, affects your forming temperatures on the plastic. The ambient temperature the plastic started at, like when the shop's cold in the winter versus hot in the summer, you have to adjust the recipe. As the whole machine warms up throughout the day, you have to adjust the recipe. Like, it is, you're constantly chasing it. It is not set and forget. It is nothing like CNC machining. So inevitably, we'd always defect some parts out, and we'd either have to go back and reset up that job and then run 1 or 2 more pieces of plastic to get 8 more holsters, or we'd have to overrun and we'd get to the end and we'd end up with 204 out of 200. And then I'd have to find a place to stick 4 extra holsters and then remember that I had them the next time the customer ordered that SKU in that color, which meant I just ended up with these sort of creeping bins of random stuff accumulating in the shop that were like, oh, 5 overruns from that thing from 6 weeks ago and 2 extra parts from the batch from yesterday. And like, it just became annoying to keep track of. It took up space. It took up time. It was wasted money and material. And I hated it. So when we moved, I just took that machine out of service and we redid all the molds so we could run them on a small modular station right in front of the CNC machine. And we took that machine apart, put it in storage in the back of the new building, and I haven't touched it since then. And that felt great, because that was like a blister on my heel, and I was walking on it every day. It never had a chance to not bother me. It was always irritating me. And so getting that machine out of the way enabled us to do much more flow in our forming process, trimming process, and inspection process right after the parts come off the CNC. And that completely changed how the whole process feels. It changed our scrap rate. It changed our ability to run to the numbers. It changed the speed with which we can set back up if something happens. You know, if the person who's doing the edge deburring scores a few parts or scuffs them up and we have to defect them out, they were formed correctly, machined correctly, but we still have to go back and do some rework. The resetup time in the new system is so fast. It's super easy. And so that whole thing that was just always a pain, we used the new building as a great time to step off the old process and into the new process, and I love it. But when people talk about one-piece flow as like a completely linear start to finish, you know, bar stock to box. We don't quite do that.
I think that makes sense with the amount of internal products you have in one SKU as well. I mean, it wouldn't make sense to have, I don't know how many pieces are in a holster, but I would imagine 5, 6, 7 different parts in it, a line, and assembling all of that at once, and forming it all and cutting it all. I mean, that just seems like a waste in and of itself in the opposite direction.
It could. We're still trying not to hold too much inventory of all the components. We need enough plus some safety margin because of supply chain issues. But there were some things I used to buy. For me, like 2012 was a year that I first started buying certain things in bulk. And like, I felt like I'd made it. The first time I bought the plastic, the bolt around or Kydex I needed, and I bought it by the pallet. I bought a pallet of it. I'm like, man, I've arrived. And then I was living in an apartment at the time, and I had that pallet delivered to a parking lot near me. And the dude forks this 4x8 foot pallet off, and I roll up, and then I realize I have a Jeep Cherokee.
Oh no.
And so I ended up dragging an extension cord over to an adjacent building and using a circular saw to cut all these 4x8 foot sheets in half on the pallet in the parking lot so that I could bend them and jam them all into the back of my Jeep Cherokee. And I'm like, okay, I haven't arrived. That was stupid. I shouldn't have done that. And like, there was one little piece of hardware that we buy that we use in basically every holster. And I decided to I'm going to skip the middleman. I'm going to go right to the source. I'm going to buy these in bulk. I'm going to find the manufacturer. And the manufacturer's like, yeah, the minimum is 250,000 units. I'm like, okay, I've been buying them like 200 at a time from a reseller on the internet. Like, is there like a mid-level distributor or somebody who won't make me buy 250,000, but will also not sell them in little Ziploc bag 100 packs? And they're like, oh yeah, call this person. They gave me a phone number. I called up the person. Was like, oh yeah, the minimum is 13,000 pieces. I'm like, oh, that's way more manageable. Help me understand, where's the best price break for these? Like, the under 250,000 unit price break. Where's the sweet spot? And he's like, oh, it's right around 50,000 units. I'm like, I'll do it.
There you go.
Because these things are like 2 cents a piece. It was really cheap. But like, it was the classic Mitch Hedberg, like, rice is great when you're really hungry and you want 2,000 of something. Like, I ordered 50,000 of these little brass rivets, these eyelets. And when they showed up, I'm like, I'm going to Scrooge McDuck. I'm going to dive in and swim around because I have 50,000 of these things. And then it took me so long to use up 50,000 of those things. So long. We did. And, I think actually I probably sold off 10 or 20,000 of them to other people who also wanted to buy in bulk, but couldn't swing the 13,000 piece minimum. I'm like, hey, you want to buy 2,000 of these from me? And they're like, yeah. So I sold them to other holster makers. But it was so dumb. It was so dumb. It felt great for a little while. And then it's like, yeah, but I could have been using that money to do other things instead of just setting it on a shelf. That's 50,000 dumb things. But, it was a relatively cheap lesson comparatively.
Totally. No, I think if you're not a business person from the get-go, you have to make those kind of mistakes to really learn what's going on. And like, the cheaper and dumber they are, the better, I think, because you don't want to make, if you had put $100,000 worth of material or something on your shelf, that would have seriously hurt you versus, not that much in brass eyelets.
You can sink yourself really fast as the inventory gets more expensive. And I mean, as we've done more complicated projects, the inventory has gotten more expensive. We have some parts that are designed by a company in Germany, and we have to get them from outside the US because they're not a US part. And, buying 50,000 things that are 2 cents a piece is very different from buying 10,000 things that are $5 a piece or $4 a piece. Like, that's a totally different scale. All of a sudden you're like, wait, we tied up how many tens of thousands of dollars in inventory for this one project? Yikes. Mm-hmm. And the trade-off is, if you don't have the inventory, you can't do the project. But it is it is sobering to see how quickly you can tie up a lot of money. And it doesn't inventory, raw materials inventory doesn't keep the lights on. Doesn't do anything other than hold your pallet racks to the floor, make sure they don't wander away. And so, yeah, an ERP is going to be a critical part of me having access to historical data and actually starting to build out the information to understand my business more fully. I want to be able to see it from different angles. I want to be able to look at every piece of information we capture and start to organize it. The same way cell phone metadata is, if you dig into it, it's wildly, frighteningly informative. The more information you capture in the business, you can find out some really surprising things. I think it was the funny example that Sonny used when he was on. He's like, why is it that we always reject parts off this machine on Monday afternoons? Oh, well, maybe it turns out it's because your operator goes home and downs a 6-pack on his lunch break on Mondays and then comes in and mistightens the vise for the next 30 parts. Like, that kind of thing is possible. I don't have that particular problem, but certainly looking at things and saying, okay, well, we've tried running this job on mill 1 and mill 2 and mill 3, and we got slightly different results because we've got different fixturing systems. We've got Pearson's on 1 and 3, but we've got a different fixturing pallet system on mill 2. Maybe there are things that are actually measurable over time that will help me make better decisions, help the employees figure things out sooner.
Definitely, yeah. Well, and there could be waste that you're not seeing because they're just outside of your view. If you're like, oh, I run this part once every other month and it's totally fine, and then you see the historical data and they're like, oh, they've been doing that for 5 years. I should just run 3 months ahead of time, and that way I can save all that production time. And while it's already set up or something, there's a lot of data that you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, and as I hand off more things to the employees to run at the CNC machines, I am a very look and see kind of person. Anytime we run a new part, I want to run like the first 50, because it's not that I just like to sort of zen out and enjoy production. Although I have that gear. I can be very happy just feeding a machine all afternoon. Not every day, but some days. Today I could have. And I really want to see everything. I want to see how the parts fitting on the fixture. I want to hear the cutters. I want to look at the edge finish. I want to check out the engraving on the part. I want to look at every detail that I programmed and see a bunch of iterations of it to see, is everything stable? Is anything changing? Is there anything that I look at and go, we could make this little tweak. We could change that leading. I could do this differently and it will be better. It will run more reliably. We'll have less risk of this corner chipping off or this happening, whatever. And as I hand off more and more jobs, certain kinds of little problems can sort of creep back in. Like, the same way you leave someplace for a little while and then you come back to it and you see it with fresh eyes. Like, I'll have a part that I haven't run in months, and, we'll be running it and an employee will take lunch and I'll say, okay, I'm going to head over to this machine and just run 5 of those. Just see how it's going. And then I'm like, oh, this is different than I remember. I think we need to put fresh gasketing in this vacuum fixture. It doesn't feel responsive the way I'm used to. Like, when I press this part down on the vacuum fixture, it feels dead. And it doesn't seem like it's holding quite as well as I'm used to. Like, the little vacuum gauge is like almost all the way down, but not 100%. Well, let's put fresh gasket in it. And then that's a chance for me to, remind the employee, hey, if you start seeing this, that's what that means. And
oh yeah. Or I mean, even processes that you're like, you forgot that you had band-aided them at the time. Like, I'll run parts that I never expected to come back like that. Oh, I just rushed through it. It was a prototype part. I made 3 of them. Great. I'll never see them again. And then 8 months down the line, I'll get a reorder and I'll go back through. I'm like, what idiot programmed this? Like, what a dumbass. And I'm like, oh yeah, that was me. Cool. Let's fix that.
Yeah. And there's no end to the little improvements that I could chase. Like, every time, because we do a lot of different versions of basically the same thing. Like, I bake pies. Some days it's blueberry, some days it's apple. They both have a crust. If we figure out a better way to make the crust, if I figure out a new trick and I save some new template in CAM for a certain kind of thing that we do a lot of, like the thought of, I can't take the time right now to rush out with this fresh, shiny solution in my hand and pull up every file that could use it and update it. I don't have time for that. Like I can't go back and retweak every little thing. But the next couple jobs that are coming up over the next few days where we're running a lot of them, I'm definitely going to take those and make that little change and see how much of an impact it makes. And like file management across multiple machines, I'm not good at. And my general default is if I don't remember, I delete this program off the machine. We do have, I have a certain range of values that are always scratch values. Everything from like 1001 to 1020. Every single program in there is absolute throwaway trash. It's a one-off, send it over and then delete it immediately, burn after reading program. And so I can just clear that little range off the machines anytime and replace them, just overwrite them. But pretty much everything else, in order to have changeovers be fast, we thermal label the fixtures. And this is an advantage. We're dry machining. So we can put stickers on things and they don't wash off, which is really nice. We don't have to engrave things on the fixtures.
Yeah, you probably have the cleanest interior of any Speedio out there.
It's got a few dents, but yeah. Note to self, talons don't hold great in soft plastics when you hit them with a 2-inch high end mill.
No, they don't. No, they don't. I can attest to that as well.
Bong. The side of the machine makes this lovely ringing sound. But yeah, we put labels on every single fixture. So when an employee gets a job scheduled, now that we're in the ERP, they'll just pull it from their queue. But it used to be that we would just take POs that came in and organize them into a paper production schedule, like this, then this, then this, then this, then this. I never schedule by days or shifts. We only run one shift. But I would just say, hey, these, as quickly as you can get them done, in this order. Everything was just rank ordered by priority with no assignments by day. If you get done with these 4, do the next one. Great. And then the employees would just go to, we have a racking system where we keep all the trim fixtures for the CNC machines for all the parts we make. All the bins are labeled. All the groups of molds are in there. The molds that are used to form the parts and the fixtures that are used to trim the parts, along with a template that shows the pre-cut size of plastic needed to form that part. It's all in that bin. So employee just goes and grabs that bin. They go over to the machine. They load the fixtures onto the Pearson pallet. They bolt them down. They call up the program number that's on the fixture, and they're ready to run. And so those changeovers are really, really fast. But I'm the only person in the shop who can make little tweaks to the program. And so there are often things where I'll see somebody running something and I have this little nagging thought of, oh, there's like a 5% improvement that I could do on that, but I'm in the middle of this other thing. And I was just walking through the shop to go over here to deal with this other thing. And I noticed out of the corner of my eye, the part that employee was running. And I think we could make that very, very marginally better right now. No, I can't do it. Not right now. And that has to be a gear that I have. I can't make every possible improvement every time. Otherwise,
right. It sounds like you're
else.
Yeah, it sounds like you're getting closer to that goal, though, of where you are just solving problems and not doing the little nitty gritty.
Yeah. So this is a thing I think about. So I listen to the Business of Machining and I listen to Within Tolerance, and the different approaches or the different visions that shop owners have for what they would eventually like to be doing in the company. I don't love troubleshooting. And I don't love management. I like creating new things. I enjoy prototyping to a point. I like prototyping things that I get to design. I don't like prototyping things that get handed to me and say, it's this, make it. So the idea of like being a prototype machine shop sounds like a thing I would not enjoy at all. Even though parts of it sound really cool and challenging, the overall thing doesn't interest me. I really enjoy improving processes, not so much solving problems. Like when John Grimsmo just says, like, we're milling stainless, we're milling titanium, it's hard material, we're using super tiny tools, and sometimes tools just break and we can't really figure out why. But I keep thinking about it and I keep working on it. And I'm like, ooh, that would drive me crazy. Like those kinds of problems. I don't like chasing gremlins around. I do like looking at a process that's working and finding ways to make it work better. That's what I really enjoy.
Okay.
And as the business grows, there's more and more of that to do, but I don't think that's ever going to be a full-time job for me. Just process improvement. I really enjoy it. Like it really scratches me where I itch.
But it could be more of your job.
It could be more of my job, handing off managing payroll, handing off building maintenance, handing off ordering a lot of maintenance and supplies. Like I should not be the person who's buying the hand soap for the bathroom. It's totally fine for me to buy the hand soap for the bathroom, but if I never put a system in place that enables other people to get hand soap into the bathroom without having to have me order it, I'm failing.
Right.
It's not because I'm above ordering hand soap. I should be enabling people to solve problems without needing to wrap me into it.
So speaking of those solves, how does Fulcrum deal with inventory tracking and reordering? Can it create POs? Can you scan stuff to say I need to reorder? Like from what you've seen so far, at least.
So we had an interim step between paper stuff and Fulcrum, which is I hired a guy this summer who had a lot of experience managing people and also managing software systems. And the thing that we did was we revamped all of our internal training documents. He initially came on a 3-month contract over the summer, and then we mutually agreed that it was a great fit, and he stayed on as a full-time employee after that contract was done. But the initial contract was creating brand new digital resources for all of our training documents and all of our product build sheets. Everything before had been laminated sheets. And we built all this stuff. We shot all new assembly videos, all new high-res photos. He did new digital build sheets. Everything's cross-linked. And then we started using a lot of QR codes. So we already had a system for certain things in our shop that we were piloting this summer where scanning a QR code with an iPad would automatically email the vendor and spec the minimum quantity. And then I would get a reply email back to my account to confirm the order and then place it. So we were already, before we even pulled the trigger on an ERP, we were already starting to distribute out some of the reordering ability. And that was wonderful, hugely helpful, because I could be doing something completely different and then just get an email into my inbox saying, hey, confirm an order for 500 pieces of this thing. And I'm like, yep, I guess we must need that. Send, confirm. And then I just go out and check and say, hey, who scanned that? And, so-and-so would say, hey, I just checked the bin. I pulled 75 of the last 120 that were there. We're now below our minimum. So I just scanned the QR code and now it's reordered. I'm like, this is amazing. But we built that from scratch and it worked so well that it was like a taste of, hey, if we had a company-wide thing that did this for everything, and Fulcrum pretty seamlessly generates native QR codes, which is nice. But we didn't have to throw all that information that we created away. All of the build sheets and the unlisted YouTube videos that are all of our product assembly stuff, all that stuff just links into Fulcrum. So we tie it into specific products or sub-assemblies or processes and workstations, and then it's just available at a click. If you're checked into that thing, it links out also to our existing library of resources, which is cool. It's nice to not have to port all that stuff inside Fulcrum.
Right.
But as far as POs, yes, when we get an incoming PO, we turn it into a sales order. In our case, I'm doing almost no estimating or quoting. We're just dealing with stable, long-term wholesale clients who are reordering so that we can supply them with just-in-time inventory for their distributors. So everything's already approved. Things get revised at scheduled intervals, and that's a mutual process. So there's almost never do they suddenly send me a PO and say, also, we need these changes to the product. Like that doesn't really happen in my world currently. So they just send a PO, and as soon as it hits my inbox, it's actionable. We turn it into a sales order. Then that gets scheduled as a job. We put it on the schedule. The entire BOM and routing are already tied to that product. And it looks ahead and does inventory planning and says, hey, in order to complete this order, you're going to need 400 of this belt clip, and you only have 317 of them left in inventory. So it will pre-queue you before the part is even started in production. If any of the sub-assemblies or any of the parts or components that go into that final thing aren't available in sufficient quantity. That is amazing. And I mean, basically every ERP does that, but it's so exciting to actually have a thing that's going to do it for me in my shop. And not just be daydreaming, it'd be really nice if the PO could tell me ahead of time if I didn't have enough belt clips.
Yeah, that would be that sounds like it's going to be such a force multiplier.
That was probably the single biggest pain point, more than scheduling, more than internal routing of parts, more than anything else. Tracking inventory and having a system that would cue me at the very beginning as soon as I entered an order before it even entered production. Having that capability was probably the single biggest pain point that accelerated my hunt for an ERP. Because in the process of moving, obviously, you've heard John and John both say growth eats cash for breakfast, and oh my gosh, does it. Like moving into a building, we had to paint, we had to put all new lights. We redid the entire building with LED lights because it had these huge, heavy, gross, hot, dim orange, high pressure sodium lamps in most of the production space in the building. Mm-hmm. And they would overheat and they turn themselves off. And so like you'd be in there and just intermittently overhead lights in the shop would just turn off. And then it'd cool down and turn back on. I'm like, we can't work in this. Like, that's crazy. The lights are on. They need to stay on. And so we pulled down 1,000 pounds of sodium fixtures and scrapped them out. And then went through and put in all new LEDs. So we had to pull some new circuits and wire a whole bunch of new lights in. And we put rapid air fast pipe in for a whole new air system. We put a 3-phase Kaiser in, and then when we moved, we brought the little single-phase 5-horse Kaiser over from the old shop and have it run into the same system as a backup. We keep them both on, both open, and we just have the pressure thresholds offset so that if the main compressor can't keep up, the smaller compressor will also kick on and supplement, or for any reason, we've had a few issues with our larger compressor. It's a 7.5 air center. We've had a few problems where it just stopped building air. We've had a few service calls. That's a bit of a sore subject. But having the small compressor there, just able to just pick up the slack immediately if that machine throws an alarm and stops building air, has been hugely helpful. I had planned to sell off the small Kaiser after the move, but it's been so clutch to have a redundant system, a redundant compressor tied into the system, that I don't think I'll ever get rid of it. We didn't do anything fancy like actually interlinking the Sigma controls on the machines. We just have them calibrated, set so that they back each other up, essentially.
One feels lack of pressure, the other one kicks on.
And the fast pipe rapid air stuff is awesome. It went in so quickly. It's beautiful. It's clean. It's easy to assemble. I mean, I had one employee. I laid out the whole system, did their 3D diagram, figured out where we wanted drops, how many connectors, all the various elbows and different things we wanted, ordered all the stuff, and then one employee on a scissor lift installed that entire system by himself.
Wow.
I didn't touch a single piece of it. I made absolutely 0 air connections.
That's pretty awesome.
It's amazing. That was also an incredibly clutch employee. The other cool thing about the new stage we've arrived at in the company is I have gotten to a point where I can start to afford older, more experienced, more capable, more autonomous employees. And I've always aspired to the Jay Pearson hire rock stars and then give them what they need and then turn them loose approach. But when the company was small and was just basically treading water, I couldn't bring somebody on with a $65,000 salary. There was no way. There just wasn't enough. There wasn't enough throughput in the company to absorb that.
Right.
I wasn't paying myself that.
Right.
But now that we have enough more work flowing through the shop and we have a big enough building that there's actually like some facilities maintenance that needs to get done. We just had some roof work done. We've got to redo some insulation before the weather gets real cold. There's a bunch of things that if I had to also have those on my plate, I would drown. Like making sure that our forklift is good and serviceable, making sure its hydraulic system is cleaned up, that some seals get replaced, that stuff gets topped off, that the roof leak gets patched, that the ridge vent cap gets replaced, that the natural gas heaters in the back bay get a thorough going over and a clean bill of health before we have to run them this winter. Like all these things, I now have a guy who I hired away from another company in town, a much, much, much larger company. And he worked there for, 12 or 13 years doing equipment and facilities maintenance and had a wide range of experience on a lot of different kinds of things. And before that, he'd worked as a lathe operator in a CNC shop. And so he's familiar with CNC machines. He's comfortable managing a maintenance department. He can make decisions for himself. He'll ask me if I need to be asked, but I can just say, hey, this is what I want to have happen. This is basically how I want it to work. I don't really know what the best way to set it up is. Could you please look into that and come back to me with like 2 options? We could go this way, we could go that way, and then we'll talk about it, make a decision, and then you just go do it. And that ability to have people who have both the breadth of experience to stay oriented and go find things out, and then evaluate them from a mature perspective, keeping in mind the overall cost of the business, the impact on our operations. Like he is death on downtime. He does a great job with our machine maintenance, but he's always clearly organizing the maintenance work he wants to do around not unnecessarily impacting our production. He's like, okay, I'm going to take this machine offline on Thursday to do this because you said we weren't going to be running. Like he's very proactive about not saying you can't run that machine. I have to work on it today. Like if he says, hey, tomorrow I'm going to come in an hour late and then stay an hour later at the end of the day so that when everybody's out of the building, I can bleed the whole air system out and do this or this or this to it. Him thinking through that and me not having to worry about it is so great. Like people who care about the company being healthy, and not just because it's their paycheck, but because they also enjoy working there and you have given them the autonomy and the permission. Like it's your thing now. Go do it. And if there's a problem, come tell me. And if I see something that I have an opinion about and I feel strongly enough about it to mention it, I will.
Well, it's nice that he clearly understands that like everything has to be subservient to production. Otherwise, nobody has a job.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. The company he came from was a big medical device manufacturing company. And so everything there is a little bit bizarro world because everything's so heavily regulated. Like as a maintenance guy, like if this fan motor on a machine breaks, he can't just find a comparable motor and replace it. It's an FDA certified process. You have to replace it with the exact thing. Otherwise, the products that come off that line are no longer certified.
Right.
And he's like, you wouldn't believe the number of things that we had to track down on eBay in order to buy the actual thing. Because like we might be buying like some generic thing and the company that makes it obsoleted the old version and has a new version that's better, but we're not allowed to buy it. We have to track down old stock units of the old version of the thing because that's the only one that's on the sheet for this process. And I'm like, that sounds like the opposite of lean.
Yeah. Sounds like a nightmare.
That sounds really frustrating. And he's been having a blast working for my shop because there's not a single roll of red tape in our building. And if he has an idea and is like, hey, I think we could do it this way, I'm like, well, that sounds great. Let's figure out if it'll work. And if it looks like it'll work, let's do it. There's no committee meeting. You don't have to like go propose this to some budget officer. You showed it to me. You have my buy-in. Let's do it. And he's like, yeah, well, I don't want to rush it. Like this is going to be kind of expensive to do it this way. I'm like, no, you showed it to me. You got my buy-in. I'll write the check. Right. Let's not spend any more time talking about it. Let's just do it. And lean as a philosophy where speed is so valuable, like getting things done sooner is an unbelievable competitive advantage. And the lady I hired to run our sewing cell, she's retired. I know her because she goes to my church. She loves to sew. She loves to quilt. She was looking for something to do. And all of a sudden I had a new sewing cell that needed an operator. So she's a part-timer and she's doing a great job, But she had also worked at that same huge medical device company for 25 years doing assembly, piecework. And she has not stopped commenting. She only started working here 2 months ago. She's not stopped commenting on how quickly things change. She's like, I leave on Thursday, I come back in on Tuesday, and a whole bunch of stuff is already different. And I'm like, well, yeah.
We found a better way.
We made improvements on Friday and Saturday. We changed things around.
Yeah.
And they had to ask permission for everything. Everything had to go through multiple layers. Everything was slow. And it's like, hey, if you encounter a problem, I want to know about it right then, not after lunch, not tomorrow. If you run into a problem, I will give you my undivided attention right now because I don't want you to struggle and I don't want the sewing cell putting out bad parts. That, like, in the manufacturing world she was from, QC was a separate department. And so her job was her room's job was always to make rate, get the scheduled number of parts completed per hour. Whether the parts passed QC later was not their concern.
Oh, geez.
In the sense that, like, there wasn't really a lot of back and forth information flowing. And so, like, they would get defective subassemblies from steps ahead of them and be like, this part won't go. Like, I can't put this in now. And they were basically told, look, just put it all together and pass it along. And I'm like, oh, no.
Whoa.
That's not what we do here. Now, I mean, obviously, stuff is eventually getting defected out. So there's some defect failure rate, but that isn't connected to their production rate. Like, everything that happened after it left their area was always kind of a black box to them. And they never really knew how many of the parts they'd made passed or failed.
Right. But that's like insane.
It is. It's a little bit catch-22 insane, like Joseph Heller, like Bizarro world. But coming from that being normal to my shop is like, no. The best time to find the problem is right now. There's no better time than right now to find the problem. And I've really been enjoying, although I haven't finished yet, the Toyota way. And one of the things that they emphasize as one of the pillars of lean is in-station quality, where if there are defects, they do not get passed along to subsequent stations. That if something goes wrong, that it gets found in the step where it occurred and fixed there. Mm-hmm. Not reworked later, not rerun from the beginning, but fixed there if it can be fixed. And that was really culture shock for people who came from a big batch work spread out in a huge facility, very different kind of approach. And it's kind of encouraging to know that what we do really does seem different. It doesn't seem different to me because I've never worked in that kind of company. Like the same way that you lose track of how fast your kids are growing until they see grandma and grandpa who they haven't seen in 2 months. And they're like, wow, he's really gotten taller. And you look at your kid and go, has he? I guess. But we change things constantly. And because the changes are always happening right in front of me, I don't notice them.
Right.
And like my wife comes to visit the shop every couple of weeks. She's not there that often, but she'll come in and be like, wow, you've changed a bunch of things. And I'm like, yeah, I guess.
Guess we did.
Yeah. I mean, in principle, yes, we are changing things. But to have somebody else stop in infrequently and really have it jump out at them how much has changed. Like the amount of stuff we've done in the new space just since we moved in mid-June. If I tried to itemize it all into a list, I think I would even surprise myself. And if you told me before the move that I'd have to have all that stuff done by mid-October, I would say, I don't think we can get that done. But every time we add a new person to the team and start to get them in gear to make lean improvements, and they start seeing in some ways how easy it is to make little improvements. One of my employees, actually, I think my most recent hire, was talking to me today, and he came from contract construction work, working for a job, working on a job site for a crew. And they were just like, show up, work super long hours, bang it out, get it done, on to the next job site. And there was a very high emphasis on not bitching on the job site. Like, keep your mouth shut. And
Right.
I basically said, I want you to go out and find some things in the shop that are not working and then tell me about them. He's like, that just sounds like bitching. And I said, it's not bitching if you fix it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
complaining about something is not what I'm asking you to do. Complaining is not a lean improvement. Noticing a problem, coming up with a solution and implementing it, that's a lean improvement. And if we only cultivate the ability to see waste and don't cultivate the ability to actually solve for it, then it's not helpful. It's not ultimately productive. And so those two going together, seeing a thing and then saying, okay, I have an idea how I can make that better. And knowing it only needs to be a 2-second improvement. It doesn't need to be I've got a plan. It's going to be complicated. It's going to take weeks. It's going to involve rerouting everything on this side of the shop, but it's going to prevent this problem from ever happening again. Well, I mean, maybe if that problem is hugely disruptive or hugely expensive or is a major safety issue, we'll do that. We'll move the whole shop around. But oftentimes it's like, I keep looking around for a red Sharpie marker and I can never find one. I buy these 4-color packs that have a black, a blue, a green, and a red. And I always set aside the red one. And then I can never find them again.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's see about ordering red ones by the case. Let's buy a case of 24 red ones and 3D print a little dual Sharpie holder that mounts with rare earth magnets to the sheet metal of the machine right by the control panel, so that when I'm there and I need to make a note on this white piece of plastic that I'm about to load into the machine or that I just took off the machine, that the red marker that I need to mark on that slippery white surface is right there. And then let's print enough of them to have one at every single machine and at the assembly bench, so that any place that I go with this slippery white piece of plastic in my hand, the next place I arrive, there's a red marker there. Like,
Yeah.
so cheap.
That's
So
so worth
easy.
it.
So worth it.
Yeah. Marker holders that Hourglass Ingenuity Brad was making.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got one on each machine now, and like, it's amazing. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
I've always got 4 Sharpies, and like, oh, if I forget to put one back, I still have 3 Sharpies there. Like, it's just
And like,
dummy proof.
I used to have a little Qualichem, like mini 55-gallon drum on my desk that had all my like pens and pencils and things in it. And it's like,
Mhm.
no, I don't need that. Like, and I definitely don't want a basket or a cup or something with markers in it out in the workshop. I want them off the table, not able to get knocked over. I don't want to have to pull one out to see what color its tip is. And we should always be storing them tip down so they don't dry out. So like, design a thing that mounts your Sharpies tip down. They'll stay inked. You can see the color from across the room. It's fixed. So
Yeah.
easy.
Well,
And
but the fact that keeps getting brought up in a few business books I've read is like, you only have to improve 1% a day to be 37 times better at the end of the year.
yeah, it's crazy. And when I've actually been giving more shop tours recently, I've probably had a half dozen people in the past 2 weeks come through and see the shop. And a lot of that's just like people who are local in Indianapolis or friends in the area who are like, oh, did you finally move into your new building? Can I come see it? I'm like, yeah, you can come see it. So those shop tours tend to be, fairly brief. It's like, here's a 15-minute tour of the whole place. But I talk a mile a minute and I just point out all kinds of things we're working on. And the impression, especially among people who saw the old shop and now are seeing the new shop, is, wow, you guys have changed a lot of things compared even to how we were doing them 6 months ago in the old shop.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't want that culture in the company to ever die. I want things to always be changing. Everything's up for grabs. On the flip side, there is still value in saying, okay, I recognize that that's a problem, and for reasons, we're going to postpone fixing it until later. That does have to be, excuse me, postponing fixing a problem does have to be a legitimate gear that you sometimes run in because life happens.
Yeah, parts still have to be made.
Yep. I was looking at the questions. We had one other one from
Baltic Blades.
Yeah. Looking in retrospective on your own experience, what advice would you give hobby knife makers that make their own Kydex sheath that would improve their sheaths the most? This is interesting. In Kydex world, holster makers and sheath makers are actually very different animals often. Usually, sheath makers specialize in sheaths, and some holster makers also make sheaths, but a lot of holster makers only make holsters and don't make knife sheaths. We don't do a lot of knife sheath work, but I used to do more. And probably the single biggest thing that I would say about improving the knife sheaths is understanding exactly how your knives are intended to function and what their use case is, and then really focusing on optimizing the design for that use case. Because there are lots of different kinds of knives. There are utility knives, there are defensive knives, there are like bushcrafting knives, there's like this is a pry bar and you can slam it through a concrete wall knives. There's a whole range of different kinds of things. And understanding what it is you're actually making and how the user is going to be using it should drive all the features in your sheath. How many attachment points you have, how much you cover the handle, how much of a drain hole you provide, all kinds of little things that impact how it's going to work when they use it. I often see a lot of knife makers, especially on Instagram, and they're just sort of making a generic fold over sheath for their fixed blade knife.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't look like they've actually thought about what's unique about their particular knives and how they want them to be used. And then you just get sort of it's a knife and it comes with a sheath. Great. I would rather have it be, it's a knife with a sheath. And the knife and the sheath are fully conceived of as one whole product together, and they complement each other. And if you think about the sheath that way, it'll make it easier to decide what to do with it and what not to do with it. Because even in something as simple as a knife sheath, feature creep is a thing. And I'm always amazed. Like when I see a lot of the kinds of things that makers make, feature creep is everywhere. And it's not good. Like more is often not better. And it's hard, especially if you're a small business and you want to market yourself. You think, okay, the more things I have to market myself on, the more things I can say about my product, the better. Maybe, not necessarily. Like I'm actually not that much of a knife guy myself. I carry a pretty basic folding knife. I've mostly carried Benchmade and Spyderco. I don't buy any of their premium fancy stuff because for me, the knife is just a utility thing. Like I love the stuff John Grimsmo makes. I would never want to make it. It's just not what I'm interested in. But, John has clearly understood what his customers want in a knife and is giving it to them. And
Definitely.
everything down to collaborating with Nanic Cases in Canada to get a custom designed, Pelican style locking rigid case with custom foam inserts that's got the Grimsmo logo on it. Like that kind of move, that is absolutely in line with this is an ultra premium made in Canada knife. It's awesome. Every single detail has been full Grimsmo. You'll love it. And yeah, go there, do that. It's amazing.
I'm glad I'm not the only one who looked up his case manufacturer after their last podcast.
Well, yeah. So Nanic cases are also they're also pretty well known in the gun world. I've got some Nanic cases. They are a pretty well known alternative to Pelican. And there are certain things about their latches and other things that some people prefer over Pelican. So yeah, it's cool. And it's funny as a piece of as a piece of business branding, a Canadian company calling itself Nanic that's clever. I like it. I chuckle. So yeah, intentionality in the sheath design to really understand the use case is probably the single biggest thing. After that, really understanding how to heat kydex well and thoroughly. Stuff that's under temped or handled too long before it's pressed performs not nearly as well in conforming to the shape of your mold or your knife or whatever it is you're using as your forming tool. So
awesome. I think those are great answers.
What else?
So
we talked about ERP. We talked about moving to the new building. We talked a little bit about hiring. I haven't had to do any firing this year, which is nice.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, not a fun part of the job, but if it's necessary, it's super necessary.
I put on here your end mill story. I don't know if you wanted to share your saga there.
Yeah, that's still an open saga. So we use a lot of single O-flute down cutters. I've used Amana, Ansrud, a little bit of Harvey. I've used some Rob Jack, but we kind of gravitated pretty early on to Ansrud Super O series, like the 64-025 series end mills, because we're doing a lot of high-speed trimming in thin plastics. We wanted to be able to make nice chips and not be getting a lot of little fuzzies, and they gave a great clean edge, and they lasted a decently long time. And every once in a while, they didn't. So we had a couple things happen. First, they're relatively expensive. For like a 1/4-inch end mill, they're between $50 and $75, depending on the length of cut.
Oof,
and
it is expensive.
That's salty, but we'll usually run one end mill for a couple of months. So it's like, okay, I buy 6 of these a year. And it used to be historically the most common cause of breakage was me dropping a tool holder that had one in it. And that only happened a couple of times. So we very, very rarely break tools. We would normally cycle them out once we could start to see the visible edge finish of our trimmed parts degrade. They're still getting a buffing step, so that's getting cleaned out. We weren't sending out parts that had, edges that had been chewed by a beaver. But if we noticed that buffing was going to have to spend a little more time dressing that edge, we'd say, okay, time to cycle that tool out, put a fresh one in. And then I had the genius idea to see if I could get them from Amazon and do recurring delivery. Sure enough, I could. They had the end mill I wanted. So I said, okay, well, it wouldn't be bad to build up a little bit of a reserve of these. So let's just, for a couple months, let's just have it. Amazon send me 2 of these each month. Great. First 2 arrived, took them, put them in the toolbox. Awesome. Next month, 2 more arrived, put them in the toolbox. Had a tool start to get dull. Went to pull one of the new ones out and looked at it and said, wait a second, that's a right hand. That's an up cut. The helix on this is wrong. And I looked, and the part number lasered on the shank of the tool was correct. It was the left-hand helix down spiral O-flute cutter part number, but clearly not the right grind on the cutter. I'm like, odd. So I reached out to Ansrud, and they said, well, what's the part number? I told them the part number. They're like, well, that's a down cut. I'm like, yes, it is. Yes, it is. It always has been when we've bought it before. But I do also buy your up flute cutters for some other stuff we do. We don't buy many of them, but we do stock them. So I also have this other cutter number, 6 in my hand. And they look identical. They're spiraling the same way. And they shouldn't be. And so they're like, well, who'd you buy it from? I'm like, well, I got it from Amazon. They're like, well, Amazon's not an authorized reseller of those. I'm like, that's not my problem. Like, Amazon didn't grind this end mill wrong.
The QC was long before it got to Amazon.
And so I returned them to Amazon, and they sent me 2 more replacements that had the exact same problem. Helixed the wrong way. And I'm like, okay, Ansrud, help me out here. Like, it's clearly something went wrong. These are all from the same lot number. Can you just replace some of these for me? And they said, you know what? That's fine. Just keep those ones. Do whatever you want with them. We'll send you some replacements. So they sent me replacements, which was great. And then I decided I'm not going to be buying Onsred from Amazon anymore because I don't actually know who on the back end is fulfilling it. And obviously nobody at Amazon, like if I try to return it and say it's the wrong item, they're going to scan the barcode and say, no, it's the right item and send me another one of the exact same thing. Like
Right.
they're not
Zero
going to actually,
accountability.
yeah, no one's going to look at it and understand what it is and be able to see the difference, which is also one of the reasons why Amazon is incredibly fraught for small businesses, especially holster companies. One of my friends runs a holster company that does a decent amount of business on Amazon, and they have a recurring problem with people buying their nice holster, receiving it, putting a piece of junk holster back in the package, and returning it to Amazon for a full refund.
Jeez.
Just part swapping. And they've had that with like $100 gun belts where somebody sends like obviously like a Walmart grade canvas belt, just rolled back up, put in the package and shipped back. And Amazon always defaults to immediately refunding the purchaser.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're having to fight thousands of dollars every quarter in Amazon fraud. And it's like, that's bananas. And of course, what's Amazon going to do if they actually punish the person? I mean, what are you going to do? They've got the product.
Right. And they've got their money back too.
The best you can do is get the money back, in which case they're still coming out with what they ordered. So Amazon in itself, like the lack of transparency and accountability in the way that structurally, like, and if somebody returns a part that they claim is defective and it's just because they damaged it, like pretty much if you sign up to sell through Amazon, Amazon requires you contractually to commit to eating that. Amazon's not eating it. And so like if you have parts that if the user messes them up, the parts are not refurbishable and they send them back, you just have to eat it. So I don't do any business on Amazon anymore. I tried it for a little while and I've seen a bunch of my friends get repeatedly burned by it. So I thought, okay, we're not going to mess with Amazon for these end mills. I'll just buy them from MSC, et cetera, someplace that, you know, everything's above board. They're authorized. It'll be fine. And then I broke 4 end mills in one day on one part. Not one job, one single part. And we're trimming plastic that's 93 thousandths of an inch thick. I'm literally cutting cookies.
Right.
And I broke 4 out of the 5 end mills that I had. I got a new batch. I ordered a bunch. I got a batch of 5 in, and I broke 4 of them on a single part. And the part wasn't even done. It was like one pass around this 8x8 inch part, and 4 cutters later, I was halfway around the part. Like each cutter lasted less than a second in the cut and then just gone. And they all broke at exactly the same spot. And they all broke not at the shank, not where the shank went into the tool holder. So these were in a nice new Shunk hydraulic holder. And they just, every single one just gave in exactly the same spot instantly when it touched the part. I'm like, okay, we've been running this part for 1.5 years. We've made thousands of this part. It's the same program. It's the same fixtures. It's the same speeds and feeds. Literally nothing has changed. Same plastic thickness. Everything is the same.
Well, you're cutting almost nothing. Like
I know.
That's
almost nothing. Yeah, it's crazy. And so I called up Andrew. I'm like, hey, you might not remember me. We talked a few months ago. I'm having another problem. And I got routed to a different person than I talked to the first time. And he asked me to describe the speeds and feeds. And he's like, well, it sounds like you're taking too big of a chip. And I'm like, but there's literally no depth of cut. Like the depth of cut is 93 thou and the fixture is relieved. Like there's no place for chips to pack. There's no way that I'm like loading up the flute of this tool and breaking it. It's not possible.
You're using a tool that can cut like wood and aluminum to cut 3/32 plastic too. Like that's such an insane thing to say to somebody.
And so He's like, well, there must be something wrong with your fixture, or maybe your tool holder isn't concentric. I'm like, okay, well, we have 4 of those shank holders. And after I broke the first 2 tools, I took the shank holder that was running just fine in the next machine over, took it out, put the next tool from this lot in this other holder, and it broke instantly. So then I went and got out the last shank holder I had that was brand new in the package and had never been run. And I unpacked it and I cleaned it up and I put a pull stud in it and I torqued the pull stud and I checked concentricity. And then with a separate tool, I put another thing in there and put a dial indicator on it. It's good. Put this tool in, the 4th tool from the lot, touched it off, and it broke. So help me out here. And he's like, well, maybe something's wrong with your fixture. And I'm like, yes, maybe something is wrong with the fixture. Maybe miraculously sitting on the shelf, something went wrong with my fixture.
I'm fairly certain you could put a rod of carbide in a tool holder and burnish your way through a holster if you needed to.
We'd probably break it if it had no teeth at all. But like I was calm during the phone call, but I was unbelievably frustrated at like we've been using your tools for years. This is a huge anomaly. We've never run into anything like this. This is so far outside the range of normal. Like normally these drill bits last for 3,000 holes. This one lasted for 0. Huh. Like
right.
Something is up. And so I actually called the guy at Shunk and I'm like, hey, so I just did this sort of ABC test with 3 of these Tendo holders and it's a proven program. It's a known fixture. Everything else is the same. He's like, well, it sure sounds like you got either a batch of bad carbide. Excuse me. He said, it sure sounds like you either got a batch of bad carbide or maybe like they got dropped in transport and like microfractured in the case. Like something's up because, you know, if you tried multiple holders and they were basically brand new and you've only been using them to trim plastic, that's all those holders have ever cut. They've never been abused on any other job. He's like, it sounds like a cutting tool problem to me. And I'm like, okay. So I called Andrew back and I said, you know, I've checked the fixture. We've run the part on 2 different machines. I'm sure it's not the spindle. I'm sure it's not the pallet system underneath. I've tried these 3 different holders. To verify, I took another tool from a different lot and put it on the machine and trimmed that part. And then took the fixture and put it on a different machine and put that other tool over there and ran it and trimmed the next part. So it's like, it's not the machine. It's not the fixture. It's this other tool from this other lot, which was an old tool. It was a used tool that was in a little plastic case that I'd written dull on with a big red Sharpie. I broke this dull tool out, put it in, and it cut fine. And I'm like, okay. And the long and short of it was, Andrew said, send me back a couple of the broken end mills and the one that's not broken yet from the lot, and we'll check it out. So I sent it back. I waited 4 weeks. They called me back and said, we're certain that nothing is wrong with these.
Which is insane.
I'm like, okay. They're like, we pulled the reports on that batch of carbide. Everything checks out. And I'm like, I wasn't really asking if the batch of carbide was good, but if something could have happened to these end mills in grinding or handling or something, because they all broke in exactly the same spot and it wasn't at the tool holder and it wasn't even at the very top of the flute. Like they all broke in the same spot. Like, what am I supposed to make of that?
Right.
And they just said, well, we think you should make of it that you should buy some more tools. That was it. Like no replacements offered, no refund or discount or anything. Just, nope, they're fine. It's not our problem. Have a good day. And I'm like, gosh, guys, I love your tools.
That's unacceptable.
This is not cool.
Yeah.
But I didn't have a good alternative ready to go right at the moment. So I bought a few more from another vendor hoping to get a different lot. And those have run fine. I've broken 0 of them since.
Exactly.
And
Well,
it's
and
like,
for comparison, the way
and
that
we
this should have been handled, like I think I told you this on the phone when you called me after you talked to them. I had that same issue happen with some Destiny 1/8" three flutes, like
yep,
maybe 2 years ago. I had 2 or 3 break in a row. I looked at their lot number on it, said all the same lot. And so I emailed Justin at Destiny. He immediately said, let me check our inventory and make sure that there's not any more. Then he emailed me back later. He said, looks like those were the last ones. I've sent you 3 ones to replace those. I'm so sorry.
yep,
Like it took 0 interaction besides me just saying, hey, I think there's a problem. He didn't assume I was an idiot right off the bat. He was like, this guy probably knows what he's doing because he's bought our tools a lot.
yeah,
And then sent me the stuff to replace the stuff that was clearly bad.
yep,
Like that's how you handle something like that. You can't just like automatically assume your customers are idiots.
yeah. Now, I'm sure if I worked in tooling, that I would have my share of horror stories about customers who are like, this tool broke. And I'm like, well, show me a picture of the holder. And like, it's a Soviet holder from the 50s that
Oh,
has
totally.
been run over by a tank. And it's like, well, I'm not sure how many meters of out of concentric that is, but it's probably more than one. Like, so I'm sure that on the other side of the table that they do often have to deal with complaining customers who are just abusing the tools and then expect to get free tools. But we're not. And this application wasn't that. So
Right.
the only thing that's still open about that is I kept one and sent it off to a separate company and said, hey, could you check this out for me and just see if you see anything? Like, just look it over. And so far, they haven't gotten back to me. But if they came back and were like, hey, it turns out that there's like literally no edge grind on these and they're not sharp. So you were essentially pushing a solid rod of carbide through, except it had been weakened by having the entire flute carved out of it. I'd be like, oh.
Okay. Yeah, that explains it.
or
Yeah.
like, we took this and after we'd looked over it, all of it looks fine. We just tapped the shank on the table a little bit and it just snapped off right here. And I'm like, oh, yep, that's the spot. Like, if there was something, like, I don't like gremlins. If there's something and it's obviously an aberration from the norm, something happened, something
Right.
changed. It's not all normal. So
Well, and
yeah,
one or
that was
two
my
from the
end mill
same
story.
lot like might be a fluke, but like not that many.
Yeah, 4 in a row, all from the same lot, and just so fast. Not like we've occasionally been cutting, be like, man, this new end mill sounds louder than I thought than I expected. Like sometimes you'll just get like little performance differences. We've had that, but like it's still cut, still left a decent edge finished. Parts were fine, no big deal. But these end mills vaporized themselves the instant they touched the part.
Yeah.
And I'm a sucker for Osrid. I keep going back to them. I'm still using them because they've done the best of all the ones we've tried for what we need. It just doesn't make me smile. So
Yeah. That's frustrating. Well,
I mean, in terms of living dangerously, ordering a few more Osrid ends mills is a lot less risky than like buying a broken Micron and trying to fix it.
Yeah.
I was listening to that episode and going, you what? You what?
I know. Servo tuning by himself. James is a beast.
That is so that went to one other thing I was thinking about. The episode on, machining ceramics on a kern.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome stuff. The explanation of the scientist versus engineer mindset, super helpful. I am in no way a scientist, and the world takes both types. I'm really happy that somebody has the time and the machine access and the cutters to like really get sciencey with that and figure out how to do that deformation cutting in zirconia. That's awesome. But on the flip side, like my interest in machining is not machining as art. And I'm not even that interested in machining as science. I am interested in machining as a method of getting things out into the world. Things that I've conceived of in my mind, I use machining as one of many processes to make them real. And that is so fundamentally different in terms of how I approach what I'm trying to get done and what amount of good enough I'll accept, that it's like a totally different world to just put myself in a scientist's shoes for a minute and say, boy, if I was going to treat this like a scientist, how would I do this? And the answer is like, man, completely differently,
Oh
like
yeah.
utterly, completely differently, which is a super fun mental exercise, but it feels so foreign that I can only go there for a couple minutes at a time. And then I'm like, okay, no. Back to quick and dirty. Come on. Let's get it done today. Out the door.
I will say though, what came out of that I've used since then, and I think is probably the biggest takeaway for me, is pushing the limits when you're trying to experiment, you're not getting any success, to just like do something drastically one way or the other and see what happens, and then you're able to modulate from
Yeah.
there, versus that just like trying to pull levers in the middle and see like minute variations. It's like no, just yank one all the way down to the bottom, see what happens, and you'll see what that lever actually does at the limits, and then you know like, oh, I'm pulling the wrong lever completely.
Give it all the feed rate and see what happens. You're like, okay, let's do this.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Turn the RPMs all the way down or all the way up, and like, oh, maybe the harmonics that I thought were there are not actually there. They're caused by something else.
Yeah. Yep. So, next section of the podcast, we talk about what we've researched, or we run out of time already.
No, I got to end every episode with what did you research this week? And it can be anything.
So, I'm fascinated by disc golf. I've been playing a lot of disc golf this past year. It was a thing that me and my sons could do during the pandemic because a lot of other stuff was shut down. Playgrounds were closed, all kinds of stuff. But the public parks that had disc golf baskets were still open, and we could just go out and play. So I hadn't played really since college. I still had a few discs tucked away in a box somewhere. So I dug those out, and we bought a handful more and went out and played and started having tons of fun with it. And so that's become a regular thing we do at least once or twice a week. My daughter, who's 11, she plays occasionally. She's not super excited about it, so she usually prefers to do something else. But I take my three boys and we pile in a car and drive down the road to a park and just go bomb around for a while and throw a bunch of discs. The design and geometry and aerodynamics and the different plastic blends and how the injection molding process, and specifically how the parts change shape when they're cooling, is part of the science of making discs. And I would love to learn enough about injection mold design to be able to buy myself a used injection mold machine. This is one of the only times I'd consider buying used equipment. And it's not because I don't see the value prop. It's because I'm not confident in my ability to fix those kinds of things. Like, huge props to anybody who can do it. I feel very much out of my depth on those kinds of things. And so for me, it's just a risk reward calculus. And I look at to a guy who can tune up a Micron and get it running again, the risk of buying a used machine is way, way less than to me, who would buy it, work on it for a few days and be like, I don't know, let's push it into a river. Like, I have nothing. And so injection mold machines are dirt cheap. Apparently, they're all over eBay. There's tons of them all over the place. And I'm like, man, okay, what kind of injection mold machine would I need to make a Frisbee golf disc, a disc golf putter? Something really simple, not super aerodynamic, not real sensitive to plastic blend. Basically, the simplest, dumbest, roundest, shortest flying, least glidey, able to be made out of rubbery or plastic putter for disc golf. What would I need to learn to design that disc, make the mold, learn how to run an injection mold machine, and then stand up a little fun niche disc golf company that just made putters? Like, that would be super fun. So researching all the different ways that companies rate the flight characteristics of their discs, how they have different categories of plastic blends based on which properties of the disc you want to enhance or minimize. It's just, there's all this cool stuff out there. And it feels like it's on the edge of being sciencey, but also has a fair amount of woo-woo in it still. Like, there's still a certain amount of, well, I just, this one just flies right for me. It's like, yeah, but why? Is it the shape of it? Is it how you're throwing it in relation to the wind? Is it a combination of hand speed and release angle? Like, is it because you've hit enough trees with it that you've bent it slightly so now it turns a little differently? Like, what's going on with that disc? And in the same way, in a lot of other sports, like golf in particular, like they've gotten super sciencey with stance and swing and follow through, and like in a lot of sports, they've gotten really sciencey with the mechanics of exactly how it works. Disc golf hasn't gotten there yet. And it's a relatively cheap hobby compared to ball golf. Like, you can buy a disc for like 12 to 20 bucks. So if you want to get a putter and a mid-range and a driver and go out and just play a local course, the courses are usually free, and you can get enough discs to play the whole course for 30 or 40 bucks. It's super cheap and fun and easy, and it's low risk. You can just go out there and have fun. I love it. I think it's a great game. And I would love to learn enough about the design and the injection molding to really play around with that. And all different kinds of injection molding machines, and the different ways of constructing molds, the different ways of holding molds, and then everything that Core Print Patterns has had in their stories for the past 16 months has like baked my brain about this. Because it's like, man, injection molding, it seems like it should be easy. But of course, anything easy in manufacturing world actually isn't. It's all a deception. Even the simple things are hard. And comparatively to the things that, that he's making, a disc is really geometrically simple. It has no deep draws. It has no little weird spots where gas will get trapped and burn the part or damage the mold. But I look at a lot of things that people that we know who are in the instant machinist community do, and the way that they just keep problem solving for months on a problem. And I'm like, I wouldn't be here for that. I don't have the patience for that. If I spend a couple of days on a problem and I haven't made significant headway, I almost always move laterally. We have enough things to do that usually moving laterally and doing something else for a while and then coming back to it works better for me than just chugging away on it for weeks.
Totally.
But some people have those gears, and it's amazing. It's impressive to me. And I really don't.
I don't blame you. I definitely know the struggle of not being able to figure something out. You have to do something, but you can't do that same thing over and over and over.
Yeah. I ran into this a lot when I was first teaching myself how to machine things, because like I sat down and just tried to read the brother manuals, having never run a vertical with a tool changer before. I'd run a little desktop router, and then I jumped to, okay, I'm going to read these manuals. And it was so hard.
Yeah, they're not the best written manuals either.
There's that, but also just like the knowledge of how G code worked and the number of codes that were in play and the way that syntax would interact with the control and actually influence the order in which the machine would do things. All these things are just sort of taken as givens. Like it was just the vocabulary of machining and the underlying knowledge. Like I was trying to do algebra and I couldn't yet do my times tables. And I'm like,
right.
How is there an X in here? This is math. I thought there's supposed to be numbers. Why is there a Z?
Oh boy.
And since then, I mean, I've come a long, long way. I've learned tons of new things, but still that daunting feeling of I can very quickly get completely out of my depth if I move into any area that I don't do all the time. Like even just moving into a new material in machining, I'm like, oh, well, I've got to machine this one little piece out of pre-hardened 4140. I've heard that's a fairly conventional material, but I've never used it before. Where do I start? And like, okay, well, let's see what happens. Sort of a design of experiments thing. Not quite all the feed rate or all the spindle speed, but like, let's pick something safe and then let's just ride those knobs a little bit and see what happens. So, what have you been researching this week?
I have been researching a few. I'll do a couple because I've got a few that were interesting to me. So I am getting glasses for the first time, and
I was due for that
so
about 10 years ago and I still haven't done it.
yeah, I had to get an eye test for work, and like the doctor was like, "Do you wear glasses?" And I was like, "No." She's like, "You should wear glasses for at least driving at night." And I was like, "Okay," but anyway, I went through all that. I got glasses. Turns out they got me the wrong prescription, but in pursuing all of this, Brad told me about Ortho K contacts that I'd never heard about, and they're expensive. They're
Mm-hmm.
not covered by insurance, but you get fitted for them. They take a few trials to figure it out, but you wear them at night, and then they reshape your eye so that you can see without contacts during the day.
Invisalign for your eyeball?
More or less, yeah.
Whew.
And I was like, "That's cool." So I'm thinking about getting a consultation and seeing what it would cost because
Correcting refractive errors, but astigmatism, nearsightedness, and farsightedness. That's wild.
yeah, and it's not by pressure either. It's by creating like a liquid well over your eye, and depending on how much liquid is absorbed is what causes the eye shape to change.
Huh. How long does the Ortho K effect last? You should be able to see acceptably well without glasses or contact lenses for a day or two, sometimes longer. For best results, you should wear Ortho K lenses every night. Gotcha. So it's an ongoing thing. This is not we fix your eyeball and then you're done.
No, 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 no. This is something you do for as long as you want to see well.
It
But
literally
it's
is nighttime Invisalign for your eyeball. That's
oh, 100,
amazing.
yeah, 100%.
I
Yeah,
had no
it's
idea anything like that existed. That's wild.
neither did I. Yeah, Brad and I were getting a beer last week, and like he brought it up. He's like, "Oh yeah, when I first got glasses, they were telling me about this." I was like, "How has nobody told me about this? This sounds amazing."
Well, I mean, it could be amazing. If it works, it's amazing. Yeah, totally.
Right. Yeah. So I'm thinking about at least getting a consultation and seeing what it will cost me. The second thing I'm looking at, we really don't need one, but I would love a dry ice cleaning machine. I don't know if you've
Yeah.
seen those.
Yep.
Brad and I are big car guys. We have dirty 80s Japanese cars. They're amazing. They're super cool at, just cutting through any grime or rust or any of that. So I've looked briefly into the cost of those, which is more than I want to spend right now.
Yeah.
And,
A lot of fun things are.
yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like, I think $3,300 is about what they look like they would cost, which if I was repairing cars or working on cars all day, I would get in a heartbeat. But as a hobby kind of thing, not really worth it right now. And then the last thing I've been looking at is 3D scanners again.
Okay.
I'm looking at used ones on eBay and kind of figuring out what it would cost to get software for them and all of that, because I do think that in Tucson especially, and probably Southern Arizona in general, there's a big lack of companies that do 3D scanning for a reasonable price. From what little I've heard and seen, it's just astronomical. And so I'm considering it and trying to figure out how much it would cost me to get into it and be effective at it.
Like one of those like walk around scan an airliner ones or something small.
Something smaller. So like, Creaform makes quite a few, and like you can get a generation or two ago for not that expensive on eBay.
Gotcha.
But I'm waiting for answers back from them on if the eBay listing does not include software, how much their software costs. Because it's all in good if I get a scanner for like $5,000, but if it costs me $30,000 in software to run it, there's no point.
Yeah, not so good.
Going used. Yeah. So those are the three things that have popped up in my search history most recently.
That's pretty fun. The only downside to correcting your vision is that you might reject more parts.
Well, I can see up close.
Surface finish is amazing.
Yeah, I just need to hold parts at like across the room. And I'm like, yeah, everything's good. Just ship it. I don't know what you're talking about. What chatter? It looks fine to me. It's the perfect
Oh,
blurry finish.
oh man. That
Well,
that finish looks scraped.
yeah.
It's not scraped, man.
Well, Andrew, I really appreciate you coming on. Patreon thank yous. I did yours last week, but I'll do it again. Thank you for joining the Patreon.
Happy to.
And thanks everyone else for joining the Patreon. It lets me do episodes like this. We didn't say it at the top of the episode, but this is our, I don't know, 4th or 5th time trying to record this episode. So I really appreciate you sticking with it, Andrew, and
Absolutely.
not just
Multiple nights,
rage
different
quitting.
buildings, different Wi-Fi networks. We still don't know what the gremlin in the machine was, but clearly we know where it is and we're never going back there again.
Yes.
So,
yes, for sure. But
yeah.
thank you, Patreon, and thank you everyone for listening. And we will be back next week.